I think they did it with no more complicated a device than this instrument called a square level. It's actually an A-frame, as you can see, with two legs and a plumb bob hanging from its apex. There's a mark in the center that tells when the object is level. You level a small area with this and erect two posts, perhaps 7 feet apart. You mount a board on the post. You could take another post of equal height to the first two and place it at a distance. Using the board as a sighting rod, you could then cut drafts in the bedrock until the pole is at a level with the first two poles in the small area that you've cut. Let's call it the leveling area.
This process could then be repeated until the entire base of the pyramid was leveled. Yet while experts may disagree on the methods used to level the Great Pyramid, they all agree that the results were remarkable.
They did an astonishing job on leveling the Great Pyramid. It deviates by less than an inch from the northern corner to the southern corner, which is a fantastic accomplishment.
The next stage was laying out the base. This was important because the orientation of the pyramid was crucial for religious reasons.
You often read about how closely the pyramids are aligned to the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. Because just as the pyramid points heavenward towards the sky is also anchored in the earth by the pyramids, because the Egyptians associated the cardinal points with the circuit of the sun, with the sky, and with various constellations.
The generally accepted theory is that the pyramids were oriented using stellar observations. By bisecting the angle between the points where a particular star rises and sets on the horizon, a direction of true north can be obtained. But other experts, including Martin Eisler, believe that a different method was used instead.
It's very hard to point to a distant star and get the accuracy that they were able to achieve. I think they oriented the pyramids by means of the shadows cast by the sun.
First, the builders would have placed a perpendicular stake, called a gnomon, in the ground.
When equal and opposite angles of the sun cast shadows over a gnomon, the bisection of that angle gives you a north-south direction.
Whatever the method, the Great Pyramid was aligned almost perfectly, its sides having a variance of less than 1/15 of 1 degree from the cardinal points. Other measurements were equally precise, each side measuring 756 feet, with a discrepancy of only 4 inches per side. In order to actually construct this gigantic edifice, the Egyptians faced an equally gigantic problem in human resources management. Contrary to the popular image, labor was not performed by hundreds of thousands of slaves, but by peasant conscripts as part of a corvée, that is, as labor owed the state by the peasants, probably as part of their taxes.
People are taken from the farms from all over Egypt. They are brought to a centralized spot, let's say Giza. They work together in organized gangs, directed by experienced masons and architects to build this Great Pyramid, which becomes a symbol of national identity.
The workforce lived and died in its own workers' city, right at the site, which was only discovered and excavated in the early 1990s.
Based on the evidence of our discovery of the size of the workmen camp, we believe only 20,000 workmen were actually involved in the construction of the pyramid. We believe that there was permanent workmen, and this could be like 6,000. Those are actually the workmen who make statues, making technical work, draftsmen, craftsmen, and things like this. But the workmen who move the stones could be 15,000, and they work in rotation. They change them every 3 months.
These workers were further divided into smaller units called crews.
A crew consists of 2,000 workmen, and they divide the crew, the 2,000, to 2 gangs. Each gang consists of 1,000 workmen. Each gang had a name, like Friends of Khufu, and each gang had an overseer. They divide each gang to 5 file. A file is a Greek word, means tribe, group. Each group consists of 200 workmen, and they had names like great ones, green ones, and after that they divide them to small units, 10 to 12 workmen.
Near the workers' quarters, their graveyard has also been discovered. One of the overseers' tombs was even made in the form of a small pyramid, complete with an underground passageway and burial chamber. The overseers lived a relatively long life, but the common laborers who died at the site did so at significantly younger ages.
All the age of the workmen were between 30 to 35 years old. But the artisans, their ages were between 40 to 45. And this gives us an idea about the levels of the workers' community. The artisans were not carrying stones, were not pulling up stones, they just carving, and it was a light work. But these people who were buried down, they worked in hard work in constructing the pyramids.
The workers were kept supplied by a small army of merchants and tradesmen who transported their goods to Giza by boat.
Also, in order to feed them, farms have to be established, new areas of land have to be cultivated in order to do this. There has to be a means of taking the products, the food, and getting them to Giza and storing them there and redistributing them.
But immense projects such as the Great Pyramid had far larger effects than simply building a monument for a dead king.
In some ways, you can say that the Great Pyramid building projects built the Egyptian state because an enormous amount of organization was involved.
It was their space program. It was the Apollo program of the past, where get all of these people to work together so they can feel great and they can have an accomplishment. And they did, and it became one country since then.
It would be this workforce that would complete the largest engineering project yet undertaken in human history. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus reported incorrectly that the Great Pyramid was built by shifts of 100,000 slaves, and that King Khufu forced his daughter into prostitution to help pay for the massive project. Egyptian pyramids will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to Egyptian pyramids on Modern Marvels. The workers who quarried the majority of the building stones for the pyramids at Giza labored at a site that has only recently been cleared of debris.
Actually, all the stones for building the Great Pyramid came from a location of a quarry next door to the Great Pyramid, about 600 feet from the base of the pyramid. And we discovered this location.
There's a grid pattern in the ground from which blocks were removed. There were trenches built in grids. They dig down the trenches, which were about 2 feet wide, and then they split a layer of stone off. And they did this layer by layer so that there's a bluff above the pyramid now that must be 20, 25 feet high.
Workers used simple copper tools, like these preserved in the Cairo Museum, to rough out the limestone blocks. Afterwards, using tools much like these, masons smoothed the sides and edges of the blocks. Then, employing wooden sleds and ropes such as this, the blocks were dragged to the pyramid. Most scholars believe that the workers piled up the blocks in sequential horizontal layers, with each layer being precisely squared and leveled until the top of the pyramid was reached. But again, not all the experts agree.
Number one, the slightest imperfection on the bottom would assume a cumulative effect as it reached the top. In addition, when I looked at the Great Pyramid, I could see that almost none of the courses were truly level. And I realized then that this was not the way to go. There had to be another approach. And this is what I devoted many years to finding.